Good morning. It's Wednesday, December 8th. My name is Jason Stanton. I serve at First Lutheran in Onalaska as senior pastor. This is my morning musing for today. As I've read that the UK, United Kingdom, is having vaccines already being given to hundreds of thousands of people here in the not too distant future. I've been thinking a lot about vaccines, and I've also been reading and hearing a lot about vaccines as well. So I'm learning a lot, and it's making me, you just think about, vaccines are a relatively new idea, much less to be implemented in our lives. There's many of us who were born at a time when vaccines didn't exist for anything. And what I learned recently was, I heard a podcast last week that there was a guy from Montana, an American, grew up in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. His dad was a very religious person. He ended up not being. Maurice Hilleman is his name. But he has such an interesting story. His mother and twin sister died. His twin sister died at birth. His mother died a couple days thereafter. And his dad, with 7 other kids, just didn't keep Maurice in his own home. He instead had him raised not far away, in fact, very close by Maurice's aunt and uncle. And so it was an interesting childhood that was described, hard working childhood in Montana. And eventually, Maurice, being a really smart kid, he goes to a college and studies this and that and really gets into different science. And in the 50s, he gets into microbiology. And by 1957, he discovers that influenza mutates almost every year. And he theorized at that point, as a really young man, that an annual vaccine that kind of mutated along with the influenza strain for that year would be required. And then he just got a knack for how to create vaccines, how to pick the winners from the losers. I learned a lot about how vaccines get made, mainly through chicken yolk, basically. And that's why sometimes they'll ask upon being vaccinated, are you allergic to chickens? Because chickens are at the heart of making most vaccines. Listen to the podcast, hear the details. I don't remember them all, but what I remember is that then after this crazy breakthrough in the 50s, for which he is greatly rewarded, in 1963, his daughter gets the mumps. And over the next 4 years, he develops a vaccine for the mumps. Maybe you've heard that's the fastest any vaccine has ever been made. One of the reasons that was because restrictions and guidelines and rules, it was kind of the Wild West of vaccine making. So he could go far faster than typically can be done now, just ethically speaking. Later, he develops a vaccine for hepatitis B. Of the 14 vaccines routinely recommended in current American vaccine schedules, he developed 8 of them. One person. It's just incredible to me. Measles, mumps, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, chickenpox, meningitis, some pneumonia thing from strep that I'm not familiar with, and then the flu shot that I named already. In this Radiolab podcast that I listened to about Maurice Hilleman, they had an interview, because he's died years ago now, but they had an interview with another microbiologist who's done a lot of work with vaccines, not nearly this much. But you got to hear Maurice Hilleman in his own words, crude as can be, not what he's not some mousy, just scientist that has no personality. He's full of personality, and not the hero perhaps that you have imagined so far with me talking about him. And yet, through his humanity, his sinnerhood, as my preaching professor would say, His sainthood shone through his work. God made use of him. And God made use of him in ways that he's probably responsible for saving more human lives than any other human ever. When you think of how many people his vaccines have touched. And I'd never even heard of him. Maybe you hadn't either. It reminds me, fame and glory are not what we're on this earth for. Doing our work faithfully is. Because us doing our work faithfully is what leads to God's will being done. And maybe your work has changed recently or over the last few years. Whether it's work done at a job or work done through relationships. But whatever it is that you're feeling called to offer the people in your life or the world around you, offer it well, because that is how God's work gets done. Keep faith alive.